Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Bridie Schellenberg joins us to discuss performing improv, how comedy can improve the relationships with your kids, and hygiene poverty. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Bridie, I'm so excited to have you here on Autism Stories. Thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you very much for having me. I am very excited as I carefully choose my words to create a sentence that is the autism in me doing that. So, but I am really excited to be here. I love getting a chance to talk about myself. That's great for me.
And talking about yourself, why don't we start off by learning about your story in the autism community? Where do you say that kind of begins for you?
Well, my story, I suppose it has to begin in childhood, in the sense that even though I was undiagnosed up until I was 34, I was put in, those gifted groups. And my mother actually, both of my parents were educators, but my mom ended up going through the administration route, and she ended up having a lot of access to sort of testing resources. Now, both of my parents were, ironically, in special education first. So you would think that I might have had some bigger flags for them early on, but girls, present a lot differently than boys at young ages, for the most part, not all the time, but in general they do. And so for me, it presented as if I was gifted, had extremely easy time memorizing things, and I just performed really well on testing situations. And so my mom would always give me high school level tests just to see where I placed, and when I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And that was, for me, it was fun to show off for my mother and get praise and to be the smart kid. And what I didn't end up developing, as most gifted kids will tell you later on, is the ability to develop studying skills and the ability to really hone in on things that how to learn to go through a challenging dynamic in school, because things were easy so young. So later on in life, I really or in my schooling age, when I got to about like calculus level, things became a little more confusing for me. What I also didn't know at that point was I didn't know that I was autistic. I didn't know I had ADHD. I didn't know. What I did know was that I had depression, and I was really hyper focused on dance. I was a very strict dancer. I did ballet most of my younger years, and that would have been my hyperfixation. And then I did like competitive dance in the many years after, did a long career with that. When I got married, eventually divorced, but when I got married and we had our first child, he had some developmental delays through age 1, actually from birth to now the speech delay basically was the flag at age 2. And when my doctor sent us through, the intervention programs. First thing we did was get speech therapy. He eventually did receive an autism diagnosis at 3. When he started to grow out of the speech delay, the behavioral stuff for him, which for me I never identified as problematic, it was more of just emotional struggles and things like that. But I identified with those struggles that he was having at ages 6, 7, and then 8. But mostly at 6, that's when I had my first, like dating back, my first memories were. So I was like, oh, he's having what I had at this age. Like, I remember having meltdowns in the front yard because I didn't want my parents to take me to try a new thing called basketball. And I was into dance. How dare you take me away from dance to try a new thing to see if I like it? And I was like, oh, maybe maybe I'm spicy. Maybe I am neurodivergent as well. So then I thought maybe I should get my testing done. And I saved the money. I did get formally tested just because for me, it was important to have the resources to further provide doctors and other, professionals with more information about me and my whole health. I believe that that's important. So that's where my autism diagnosis, journey, discovery, kind of how it all came about for me. Yeah.
Whenever my day isn't going as I have scripted it and it's not going as well as I hoped, I try to remember to pay attention to your Twitter account because it always usually makes me laugh and brings me back in a better place. So there's so many tweets of yours I enjoy. Are they still considered tweets with the name change and all that? Are they X's? Although that would be confusing as well.
They're triple X's if they're of a certain content.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah. Maybe they're chirps.
Maybe they're chirps. Okay, fair enough. Chirps. But I wanted to mention a specific one where you said recently, so much of how I live my life is based on how I watch sitcom characters always say that they were going to work, never actually work, and just deal with their life drama and then magically expect money to arrive in their bank accounts. This is a very true statement. This really summarizes how I felt about sitcoms as a kid, but wasn't able to intellectualize. So I'm wondering, are there specific sitcom characters that you feel most connected to?
I didn't really watch a whole lot of sitcoms in my youth, except for like Boy Meets World. And that was like the beginning of my exposure and really I kind of like connecting to sitcoms at a child age. But then as I grew up and really developed a love for comedy, I connected so much with Will and Grace. And I really connected with, honestly, all of the characters, but I connected a lot with Grace because of her character's high range of emotions and inability to really regulate them without having a second party there to kind of rein her in. That's something that it's like right now I'm analyzing this in this moment. And I think I'm doing better at this because I also go to therapy every week. I also have a therapist that I see every week that I know I need that therapist to talk about my feelings. Otherwise, I'm going to explode. But Grace's character really has a huge range of emotions, and sometimes they seem very selfish or self-centered. And they're always on the surface, they're selfish and self-centered, but a lot of the times in those situations, they are trying to find her self-worth in those scenarios. The other thing about Will and Grace that I have always connected to is just the brilliant writing of the sitcom. It's the banter, the quickness is just beautiful, the timing, and the way that they portrayed societal struggles a bit, more in that sitcom. But one of the other things about specifically that tweet was Grace always went to her interior design job. And in sitcoms, you see these worlds where they go to their jobs. And when you have episodes where they go to their jobs, you might see them struggle with like one job-related incident. And it might be like, oh, the pattern didn't come in, and oh, darn, I'm going to have to order another pattern. And then nothing else is related to their job. Everything else is related to, there's just no struggle at all with like social interactions at work, the boss and employee dynamics, the wage gaps, the real struggles that go into these companies and corporations, or even like self-business, like entrepreneurships, and it's just, oh, this one thing was really hard this week. Now I've got to go focus on my relationship problems. And now I've kind of lived a life where I've like really struggled with work. I've really struggled with working my ass off in every job that I was in. But then ultimately it fueled my disabilities that I have. I have multiple autoimmune diseases. I've now realized that I'm autistic, ADHD, and I was not built for the workplace environment. And I don't think a lot of us are, but I still am working on anything. I come to my own computer and work on something for no money, but I'm trying to create money, and hopefully it magically appears in my bank account. And that's just kind of like, I'm trying to embody this sitcom mentality of, well, I'm just going to dreamily make my way into millionaire status. I feel like a lot of what even like influencer life kind of shoots down our throats, is kind of like, we can do this in reality. And we don't see a lot of sitcoms now anymore because people want it in real life. And now I just think that everybody wants the dream, and the dream is a dream. So that's where a lot of that internalization of that tweet came from. So.
For those that don't know, you write sketch comedy, do stand-up comedy, and also do improv. So one very funny sketch that was created this year, I believe, or at least was released this year, was where you were working with Alan Sidley at a skit called The Interview, which was in multiple parts, which I very much recommend people go to YouTube and find this because it was very funny. And you play an interviewer in this. So for me, I'm constantly interviewing people, and I'm always trying to improve as an interviewer. So do you have any tips for me?
No, I really don't. I think that's part of the joke that I wanted to, and that we wanted to make with the interview, is just how much improv happens, even if there are cue cards, even if there are scripts that you're going by, how much you really do have to think on the fly. So the whole thing with the interview was fully improvised. The whole sketch was. And so basically we're thinking of things to talk about and how people really create false justifications for things that they might say without thinking about them, and how they have to really double down on what they say or create a protective bubble around what might have been said. So, like, there's no world in which you can say, well, I'm not sure that I agree that everybody should be getting, money from the government, because what about babies? They don't even work. And then, but if you're in an interview, you're going to get pushed on that. So you can't, if you're in an interview, you can't be like, and you should be able to say, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to take that back. Now that I'm really thinking about it, babies should get some money because they need some support to live, like they can't work. But if you're in an interview, they're going to double down and they're going to push you to get you to say the bad thing. That was the whole idea behind the interview, is just how we create these environments that are so kind of toxic in entertainment media, in news media, just to get the fights, just to get the people stirred up in the comments, when really we should be able to have conversations where we can say something and then be able to say, you know what, now that I've reflected on it, I don't think that that's really what I believe. I think that we should be able to allow more room than just a 1-minute clip to give people what they really think. So that was the idea behind that.
So, in thinking about improv or sketch comedy, do you think there are ways that being autistic has helped you to either enjoy it or to be better at sketch and improv?
Absolutely. One of the beautiful things, and I really think it is a beautiful thing about being autistic, is, and I'm not sure if it's autism or ADHD or a combination of both. For me personally, I think everybody has their own struggles with what's taking a hold of them or working its way through their brain at what particular time. One thing that I really have a lot of is echolalia. And so a lot of the things that come out of me verbally is repeated sounds, repeated songs, repeated phrases. And in a lot of ways, that can be really helpful for things like improv and things like even writing sketch. For example, one of the sketches that I wrote with a friend, we ended up taking a whole different direction, because when we were kind of writing back and forth, instead of saying, I'm going to wash the laundry, I said, we're going to go wash the laundry at the laundromat, because it was just, I just kept hearing all the people who say wash instead of wash. And that was my echolalia at the moment. And the whole sketch took a whole different turn. And it was one of the funniest things that I've ever written with anybody. And it's still to this day in like the top thing in my portfolio. So I think that one of the things I really highly encourage people who do experience echolalia to like record it and to share it and to really embrace it as a stim, because it's so much fun to get earworms into people's heads, into like really to just get anything out of your head, because it really, for me, it creates more space for more creativity to play in my brain. So yeah, it's really, once I realized it was autism that was happening, and that was happening for my creativity, I got more creative for sure. So yeah.
So I'm fascinated about improv in the sense that, like, takes me a while to process things. Like after this interview, I'll process it, and probably within the next 24 hours, I'll think to myself, Oh, these were 17 different follow-up questions I should have asked Bridie, and I didn't at the moment. So I'm wondering about processing during improv. Obviously, all of us, all of our autism is different, but I'm
Mhm.
wondering, how does processing work for you in those improvisational moments?
Um, for me, honestly, I process things based solely on my feeling in the moment. Like if it's a positive feeling that I'm feeling, almost like a euphoric high, then that's really the takeaway for me. If I heard laughter, that's the processing for me. If I heard someone, any sound that was like, oh, or like any sort of reaction, then for me, that's where I'm like, it was a success. Because I try really hard not to be hypercritical of things that happen for improv specifically when you can't go back and edit it, you know, where it's like, well, we only had one chance to do it. So, like, we did the best that we could do in that moment. So, I try to really just go off of the laughs. I try to go off of, how much noise did we hear? Was there applause? Was there laughter? Was there engagement in the crowd? I really, if anything, to go back to the tape and film the tape, or go through and maybe look at my physicality. That would be something that because I can't visually see what I'm doing, that would be how I process my technique more for improv. With Because I also do stand up, but with stand up as well, I personally have a hard time remembering all of my material word for word and rhythmically. So even then, I kind of take like an improv approach. It's more of like, how much dead time did I have in between my jokes? Can I speed up my jokes a little bit? Can I banter a little bit more? What can I do to create more laughs in between? So I try, in a lot of ways, I try to use and employ what I know from what I've developed in social interactions, maybe like conversationally, through masking techniques, maybe even of how to engage with people when I'm uncomfortable, and use those techniques to create more comfortable environments for improv, for stand up, and all of those things.
Now, besides doing improv and being a comedian, you're also a mother. So I'm wondering about the intersection of comedy and being a parent. Do you have advice for parents on how to use comedy in some form to have a better relationship with their children?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny that you presented this question because I've actually kind of been toying around with the idea of creating like a parenting class. Not like, I am no parenting saint. I'm not saying that anything that it would be more for developing relationships with your kids. There's something that people are connecting with, and I'm going to use Bluey, like that television show Bluey that everybody knows and loves because it's flawless. Let's be real. Where people look at the parents, the character parents on Bluey, and they're like, I want to have that kind of relationship with my kids. I want to be able to play with them constantly. I want to be able to interact in a pretend play way and come up with those ideas that these cartoons do. And of course, they're cartoons, they're written by humans and it's all planned and created. But for me, that's something that I have always personally, and it's not really a brag, it's more like, for me, it's a little bit of a coping strategy socially. I'm able to play with my kids really well because of improv techniques that I really didn't understand that I was using until I was taking improv. Things like when I have like my 3-year old who is saying, Mommy, can we play with Barbies. And I get a Barbie. And for me, I have a really hard time with playing with objects that are, for example, like outside of me. I do better when I am pretending to be a character versus using a character and doing voices for that character, like making up stories for something else. Like I would rather pretend to be a monster for me and chase around the house as opposed to using little toys. But one of the things that I have learned to do is to incorporate both together. And so if my daughter wants to play Barbies and she gives me a Barbie and says, hey, mommy, you be this one, you be Skipper. And I'll be Skipper. And then I'll take Skipper and say, well, who's this big girl? Who's this big girl? You don't look like a Barbie, talking directly to her, and the whole thing is yes-anding each other. So she'll be yes-anding me, I'll be yes-anding her. And you don't realize it's happening on the surface but it's a whole lot of mutual agreements to the storyline. And even if the child makes the rules for the story, you can still find ways to insert your own fun. And they will love that. They will love that as long as you're gentle and respecting their boundaries. It's quite fun. We have a lot of fun. So anyway, so I was thinking of eventually developing a little bit of a class that might focus on that. But I think that a lot of parents really kind of struggle with that. I say coping strategy though, because for me, when I'm in big groups, let's say we're in like parties or something, like if there's a bunch of parents, everybody has kids, I immediately go to the kids because I really struggle to interact with adults because they don't know how to improvise. Kids do. So I go straight to the kids and I start playing with them. It's so funny to me, but
I understand that. I've always done the same thing. Kids seem to be a lot funnier than adults anyway. So why not enjoy yourself if you have to be at like a party or get together, which is one of my least favorite situations. Like let's try to enjoy ourselves here.
I really do. I really hate parties unless there's kids there, which sounds creepy. I mean it in the most wholesome way.
But I love your idea of the parent class, and I'm not a parent, but I still would love to participate in that class because it seems to me like that there's not nearly as much information out there about building relationships with your kids, and there's all this other information out there, and I feel like humor and improv, I think, are some probably important building blocks in those relationships.
I think one of the things that's so important too is to realize that you can use humor even when you have to be in a disciplinary environment, and it allows the kids to feel safe while they're understanding that there are consequences to their actions. I literally just did it this morning where my 5-year-old was invading my 9-year-old's space. My 9-year-old said 5 times, stop doing that, stop doing that. And then eventually my 9-year-old yelled. All of this is huge growth for both of my kids because neither of them are just like, coming straight to me, and they're creating their boundaries. Then they got louder and then they came to me for help, so my 5-year-old, of course he's 5, he doesn't quite understand as well as the 9-year-old does. He's like, I'm just mad because he yelled. And this kind of stubbornness just happened for like 20 minutes. And eventually I was like, can we talk about it if I use a silly voice? And he was like, yeah, fine. And so I did the whole rest of the conversation like Mickey Mouse. So and then he understood it. It's just like you do whatever it takes to get the child to interact with you and hear the lessons, as opposed to just being the authoritative figure, they need to trust you. They need to trust that you're on their side.
And we've been talking about comedy and some funny things. And something that isn't funny is the cost of being a parent, particularly to low income families. So the cost of diapers, I believe, has gone up about 25% in the last 5 years. And hygiene poverty is not being able to afford many of the everyday hygiene and personal grooming products most of us take for granted. So, in thinking about that, you're connected to the Care Bank. Can you tell us about the Care Bank, maybe your role with them, and how people may be able to help out the Care Bank in regards to hygiene poverty?
Sure. So the Care Bank it's a company that I started, and it's basically a diaper bank, a hygiene bank, a combination, but it works solely through receiving online donations, financial donations, and then I also receive through the website. There's two sides of the website, basically. One side you can donate to support the cause, and the other side is where people who are in need of hygiene products, who are in need of diapers, can submit personal requests for themselves or their families. And so the funds that are received from donations, they are used to just send hygiene products and diapers straight to them. And right now, I really, after doing a lot of research on diaper banks, there's not a lot of accessibility. There's not a lot of availability, and the times in which you can pick up, everything's just so restricted. And the amount of resources are so restricted just for diapers alone. For hygiene products, on the opposite side, I wasn't able to find a single hygiene bank that existed like within this state, and it's very hard to find any that exist. At least in the United States, you can find them in like online and in the UK and maybe in other countries, but it just doesn't exist here so much. And one of the things that's really important to remember is that SNAP benefits, which are, the government support, financial supports that groceries for low-income families, they do not provide SNAP benefits for hygiene products or diapers. So these are things that are coming out of the pockets of people who already have to pay bills towards other things. And it's really, there's a lot that needs to change about the SNAP system as well. But for now, what my goal was to create a more seamless system where if there were requests that came in, we could just send stuff to them directly without them having to drive, waste money on gas to get these items. If the Care Bank has a way to ship things for free, then we can get them to them right away or as quickly as possible. And so that's the whole idea behind the Care Bank. Low overhead.
And lastly, how can our listeners learn about you and the Care Bank beyond this interview?
You can go to bridieschellenberg.com and you can find me at thecarebank.com. It's very, very straightforward on both websites. And then on social media at Bridie Schellenberg or at Bridie Schellenberg Comedy. Either one, you'll find me.
And please, at the very least, start to follow Bridie on social media. It will your days and weeks will be better off for it. Bridie, thanks so much for joining me today. I was so happy that we got a chance to talk here on Autism Stories.
Thank you so much for having me. I have really enjoyed it, and yeah, I would love to do it again sometime.
Definitely. Thanks so much to Bridie for the conversation. To learn more about Bridie, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Did you know that Autism Personal Coach provides neurodiversity affirming support by autistics for autistics? We empower autistic adults and teens to lead self-directed, purpose-driven lives through our customized life coaching and community groups. Our distinct approach prioritizes each client's unique goals and preferences, fostering a sense of agency and promoting self-advocacy. Coaches work collaboratively with clients to develop personalized strategies and tools that can help with executive functioning, emotional regulation, relationship building, stress management, and much more. We also support parents and partners of autistic individuals by providing insights and guidance to bridge communication gaps and nurture mutual understanding. With our accessible remote services, individuals from any location can receive the assistance and mentoring they need. Join us today to experience judgment-free coaching rooted in empathy, expertise, and respect for autistic identity. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.